So I'm with the Center on Education and the Workforce at Georgetown University. You can go forward one. And we're known for, the center is known for a lot of things, but particularly known for a lot of our work on projections, really looking at what the demand for post-secondary education is likely to be. And some of you have probably seen various reports, Help Wanted and Recovery 2020. We also have done a lot of research on what earnings, especially at the BA level, look like by major, by field of study, and in fact, we're getting ready to roll out a new set of a new study in that area. And last year, we put out a study looking at the online college labor market, looking at the role of real-time information. I think Kristen mentioned that earlier. That is, the job ads that are scraped from across the internet and kind of used for insights into hiring and the workings of the labor market. We did a report looking at the limitations as well as the potential for using that source in workforce decisions. And then we've had a series of reports that are more sector-focused, what's happening to the workforce in healthcare and STEM. Just put out a report on nursing, for example. Great. So I've been asked to talk about some of the research and policy questions that you all can be thinking about, that everyone can be thinking about going forward. And I've tried to organize those questions into three areas. First, credentialing. So I'm going to pick up a little bit on what Rachel was talking about, but the credentialing marketplace and how we can dive deeper into what's going on there. Career pathways, and which, of course, is getting a lot of resonance with WIOA and other initiatives. And then predictive analytics, especially trying to look at some of the implications on the workforce side. So I'm going to start with the first area, credentialing, the credentialing marketplace. You could advance. Okay. So I think there's universal interest in greater measurement of post-secondary outcomes. So we're seeing it, as Rachel said, at the state level with performance-based funding initiatives. There's quite a bit of interest at the national level as well. And there's a recognition that we know a lot more about the value, the connections to formal degrees, academic degrees, and much less about the proliferating credentials that are really at the sub-baccalaureate level, and that are what the Census Bureau has called alternative credentials, right? The Census Bureau put out a report a couple years ago about really an important one, looking at the prevalence of certificates, certifications, and licenses. And I think that's an area that people are just starting to explore. And so I think some of the key questions in this area are, what are credentials of value, especially though for credentials that are not academic degrees, that are more occupationally focused. And we need a deeper dive at the sub-baccalaureate level, which is something that we at the center are really interested in doing and starting to work with states on. A particular question is a number of two-year systems around the country. Perhaps some of yours have started to put in place applied baccalaureate programs, which are kind of more intensive degree programs usually in an occupational area that doesn't conflict with what's being offered at the four-year system. Those are just kind of getting up off the ground. What are the outcomes? What is the payoff, the relative payoff to some of those programs with other credentials? And then non-completers, there's been a lot of interest. California has done a lot of the initial work in this, but there has been some other work out of New York and other places. What's happening to a lot of the individuals who are going through community college and taking coursework, but not actually getting a degree, right? Now, and there's some indications that those folks are taking there's a range of activity. Some of it just might be random course taking, but in other cases it might be course taking with a purpose, leading to either a certification or a workforce outcome. So there's a lot. I think we have not even begun to scratch the surface really in that area. Now, as I mentioned, we're very interested in this arena, if you could advance one there. In 2012, the center put out a report on certificates using SIP data at the national level. And as I said, we're starting to work with some states on really trying to do a deeper dive in this area. What are certificates worth? What's the connection to further post-secondary education and training? And just from this report, there are a number of findings, but the finding from here in particular is that a lot of the benefit for certificates goes to those who earn them and then are working in field, basically, in a field related to what they were trained in. If you could advance. So I was also asked to talk a little bit about the data gaps, and of course, you as well as everyone knows that there are plenty of data gaps, but I'll just focus on a couple. In the non-credit arena, there is a lot of, I wouldn't say it's a complete hole, but it's a little bit, there's definitely limited data for sure. RTI did a survey recently that was released just last year looking at what states have. And of course, there's variation in what is collected. And then below a kind of a basic head count in enrollment, there's often very limited data on demographic characteristics and what people are actually taking and all of that. So that's certainly an area that you will run into. And then Rachel mentioned industry certifications, which are really essentially invisible from a state data system perspective. But there are some important initiatives underway. We can talk more about that perhaps in the discussion that are trying to fill in those holes. And then I've also talked with a few states recently that are on their own establishing relationships with some of the certification bodies, especially for certifications that are important to industries in their states. I think that's another important strategy for trying to fill in that gap as well. Moving on. The second big area is career pathways, and of course, there's a lot of national interest in that. WIOA embeds a definition of it and creates it as a function at the state board level and the local board level. There are state initiatives going on around the country, perhaps in some of your states as well, but despite the kind of the flurry of interest, there's still really not that much known about the outcomes, educational or labor market for those going through career pathways. Now, there are some national evaluations underway, multi-year evaluations, but there's much more room to probe this. And I think one of the key questions in this area is what's happening to individuals who do go through, who take part in maybe the first rung of a career ladder or the first segment of a career pathway, go into the workforce. Maybe they get a certificate or they get certification or something and go into the labor force. Are they coming back? Are they re-engaging, right, with the community college system or workforce training and moving up another level? Are they going from nursing assistant to nursing programs leading to registered nursing, et cetera? So that I think is one of the questions, and I think there are some doctoral dissertations going on right now to try to address that question, but there's a lot more that we need to know in that area. And then also what prevents people from re-engaging and moving on, right? Those are some of the related questions there. And then WIOA, of course, pushes out the frame for looking at outcomes to 4 quarters right after participation. We still could know a lot more about the longer-term outcomes, especially of more substantive training and technical training. So much beyond 4 quarters. What are some of the payoffs, and especially those that are individuals who are combining services, multi-program services, and having pretty substantive training services. Now, moving on to some of the data gaps. Of course, when we're looking at career pathways, we are by definition talking about, in most cases, multi-program linkages. And so one of the key issues is the gap in trying to identify individuals who are moving from one educational setting to another, for example. So the classic example is adult education, and who is moving from adult education and literacy setting into college level courses. And then occupational information on the wage record, of course, is a gap that all of you are facing. A couple of states are really are addressing this, but if you think about what the possibilities would be with with occupational information, the world of career pathways would really open up to people, right? Because you could trace more clearly the connection between major and field of study and and the field of employment, and what happens to people after their initial job, et cetera. Now, there is another way to go that we're interested in at the center, and that is trying to look at resume data that job seekers submit through their systems, social media data in some cases, to try to essentially backward map, look at reality-based mapping of what people are doing in the workforce. And actually, the example I have here is from CUNY Labor Market Information Service. They've been doing some interesting work with pay scale data, essentially looking at questions of people in the workforce, trying to see what they were doing 5 years ago, and then look at some of the common routes to those jobs. And I think a lot more could be done. I'm not sure how much is being done with the resume banks at the state level, but there are some interesting questions that could be asked there. And then third, and the last area, is predictive analytics. It's an exciting area, and there's in some ways a lot going on in a lot of arenas, not just in education and workforce. And it's really an emerging area where we're just starting to figure out the right questions, the right methods. There's some limited research on the predictors of post-secondary education success, right? So Washington State in particular has done some good work looking at how completion of 15 credits and certain gateway courses really sets people up for completion of a degree and persistence in a program. And there's been some research in the workforce arena, especially in the context of performance adjustment models, right? And we can talk about that, but the Upjohn Institute has a really interesting paper looking at some of the characteristics of participants and the association with employment outcomes. Some really interesting information there. But there's much more that we could do, right? You could be looking at how does the mix of services at the one-stop level, the intensity of service, affect employment outcomes? Do certain service patterns affect reemployment success, and more, right? I think the sky is the limit in that area, and WDQI and SLEDs are really set up to do a lot of that work. So just a word now on our state initiative. We at the center we've started, but we're really kind of moving forward this year with a foundation-funded effort to work with states that are interested in using administrative data more effectively and for certain use cases. And really the idea is to try to help states build out their data systems as well as use them in a number of ways. And we have a team of experts that are working with us. For example, Jay Pfeiffer, who used to be with the Florida system, and others. And we're able to work and provide the resources of the center, analytic support, as well as our content experts there on specific questions, some of which I've covered today. And then moving on to the final. The way we're thinking about it is that we're thinking about turning data into actionable information about 5 key areas. And I'll just run over those and can share some of this later. The first area is thinking about how to align educational program capacity with what jobs employers actually have. So some balancing of enrollment with what's going on in the labor market. Aligning curriculum with what employer needs are. There's some good models in that area. Job placement and skill gap analysis. Counseling and career pathways. What kind of outcome information and other career pathway information do students and workers in retraining need? And then business expansion and workforce quality. So that resonates with the discussion earlier about economic intelligence, right? How can you use these systems that are showing the college supply to work with employers that might be expanding or moving to your states? So we're working with a few states, and we're getting ready to reach out to more states when the new SLEDs announcement hits the street. So Thank you very much.